Bill, welcome to Shifting Culture. Honored to have you on. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Josh, for having me. I'm thrilled.
We're going to be talking about guns today and the what you call the unholy trinity of white evangelicals, politics, and firearms. In your new book, "In Guns We Trust," this is a book that made me angry as we in the white evangelical space have really been complicit in gun violence because of our embrace of gun culture. You were have a story of like merging like evangelical faith into missionary work. You're a journalist, have been around the world as a foreign correspondent. You've covered gun violence as well as a journalist. How's these things as a journalist, your evangelical faith in your life, how have they merged together to come into this moment?
Oh man, I'm not sure that they've merged so much as they have collided within my soul.
Yeah.
And I really, honestly, in all transparency, I can no longer, in good faith and in good conscience, identify as an evangelical. I am very much an
Yeah.
ex-evangelical. I am also very much a Jesus follower and someone who finds faith, even more important to me than when I started this investigation in some ways.
Mm,
But yeah,
mm,
everything that Christianity promised me when I first believed. This feels like a betrayal of all the beauty and joy and purity of my faith to see Christians, gravitate so strongly to the gun culture and to embrace it. It's just bewildering to me.
yeah. So you start one of the first stories you talk about is leading worship and people carrying weapons while you're leading worship. Just share that story for a moment to take us into just your how you actually rubbed up against gun culture in the church.
Sure. So actually, the incident you mentioned there is kind of what set me on this quest. I was a worship leader at a megachurch in Massachusetts when my bass player showed up for rehearsal with a 9 millimeter Sig Sauer semi-automatic handgun, and it, it just literally blew my socks off. I mean, I could not wrap my mind around it, and I kind of confronted him and said, "Dude, why? We're here." Singing and preparing, to lead the congregation on Sunday in worship of the Prince of Peace, and you're carrying this
Yeah.
semi-automatic weapon. It was the first time, kind of like my proverbial scales fell off my eyes when I realized that this was actually commonplace. I didn't know, and I've had 35 years of experience with evangelical Christianity, and I quickly learned that many people were carrying weapons, including even to church on
Mm,
Sundays.
mm. Well, so let's get into some of the factors. Like, how did this start to happen? What were the factors on the fusion of gun culture and white evangelicalism?
It's really fascinating to me because up until, the late 1960s or so, most most denominations were officially pacifist. And of course, we understand as Christians
Mm,
that Christianity is, I think anyway, objectively nonviolent. It's really not up
yeah,
for debate, right? I mean, we see the person of Jesus
yeah,
Christ, compelling us to turn the other cheek. He laid down his life. He could have called a legion of angels, with swords, that era's version of the AR-15, if you will, and he didn't
yeah,
do that. I mean, it's so
mm,
there's that, right? But something
yeah,
shifted in the late 1960s when evangelicals, white evangelicals, to be more specific, kind of realized that they had political power. And up until then, they were
mm,
kind of doing their thing out of sight of the general culture, and sort of found a voice. This all coincided with desegregation in the United States as well, which is
yeah,
not a great and beautiful beginning for a faith movement to
mm,
find its political voice. But that's what we had. I mean, we had white Christians who were really not that happy
mm,
about ending segregation in the United States. But rather than
Yeah.
coalesce around a platform that problematic, they sort of latched on to
Mm.
some other issues, abortion and gun rights. And all of this was started to be reframed as, issues of religious freedom. And then again, superimposed over all of that was, you know, challenges to prayer in the public schools, which kind of roused many
Mhm.
white evangelicals, and the
Yep.
rise of powerful vocal televangelists like Jerry Falwell and the
Mm.
moral majority movement,
Mhm.
and even Billy Graham, who
Yeah.
is a beloved figure, right, to many of us, kind of
Mhm.
led the charge into getting evangelicals to vote and to become kingmakers in elections.
Mm. Yeah, I think, I mean, if you're looking at their political power, that's one of them. Are there any other factors as you've looked at it?
Absolutely. And I think the thread that runs through all of this is what I call the fear factor. And I devote much of the
Mhm.
book to sort of unpacking that. This idea
Yeah.
that they are out to get us, right? And I've been a evangelical Christian for a long time. I never quite worked out who they were, but
Yeah.
to the evangelical mindset, there is this menace in
Mm.
society where there's this idea that a hostile culture is out to get them, out to take their
Yeah.
Bibles away, and more recently, out to grab their guns. And this is a very potent, although false, narrative that drives gun sales. Frankly, I mean, the gun industry in
Yeah.
the United States is a $9 billion a year, largely unregulated industry.
Yep.
And we can maybe talk about this a little bit later, but also an industry in which white evangelical Christians play an outsized role running a lot of these companies. There's a lot of
Yeah.
ugly stuff going through here. A rather bewildering fusion of faith and firearms uh,
Mm.
that just doesn't seem consistent with the Christian gospel.
Yeah. Well, it's not. I mean, just just as an anecdote from my own life, is I lived in the Middle East for 5 years, and so I'm in the middle of a place where there's war on all sides. I'm living in Jordan, so there's war in Syria. Right now there's war Israel, Palestine. There's we have war surrounding us. Refugees are coming in. I'm doing some refugee work, but I feel safer there than I do in the United States where I live. And it's just, and as soon as I moved back to the US, I felt a spirit of fear. Like it was a different spirit that was over the country. It was, this is what we swim in. It feels like just the water that we swim in or the
Right.
air that we breathe is fear. Where do you think fear, specifically in the United States, comes in? As you say in your book, hey, these mass shootings have happened around the world. People have said, let's stand up, stop these things. They've had actually enacted some good gun policies that have stopped a lot of these mass shootings. Why do you think this culture of fear really propagates in the United States?
It's difficult to figure out, honestly, because again, when you start to dig into this fear, you come up with chimeras and vapors. You don't really find substantive reasons to be afraid. Look, there
Yeah.
are around 60 million white evangelicals in the United States. They are a potent force. They are also
Hmm.
enjoying incredible privilege
Yeah.
politically, culturally, and to some extent economically as well, right? So, of
Yeah.
all the people, of all of the citizens of the United States, they are arguably least, uh, deserved, or not deserved, but least, they should be the ones who are least afraid, right? And
Yeah.
instead, they are very afraid. And again, this is sort of mushroomed with the ascendance of Christian nationalism in this country,
Mm.
which just a few
Yeah.
years ago was a fringe ideology, and now it's
Hmm.
mainstream, right? And we see members of the president's cabinet who are unapologetic Christian nationalists. And
Hmm.
there's a reason again why white evangelicals are so drawn to QAnon conspiracies and things like
Mm,
this, right? The idea that there's a secret cabal of leftist Marxist uh, leaders who are conspiring against the rest of the U.S. population, and and they're
yeah.
all pedophiles. I mean, this stuff is crazy town.
Yeah.
It really is,
Hmm.
and it really makes me angry, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, it persists nonetheless, and it's hard to figure out why. I just think there has been historically this kind of circling of the wagons, if you will,
Mm,
among white evangelicals who are, you know,
mm,
determined to protect their way of life. And lastly, there has always been sort of this patriarchal streak throughout white
yeah.
evangelicalism where, you
Yeah.
know, men particularly are to protect their wives and children at all costs,
Mm, yeah.
and the gun has just really become front and center in that, you know.
Mm. Yeah, it's moving. I, what I heard recently, Mark Driscoll said, that you need to replace the word shepherd in the Bible with the word cowboy, and it's just and that's what a pastor should be, right? Is to kill the wolves, and it's violent language that's happening around faith, right? So violence and faith when you saw, and we'll just go one more way of this actually just coming to pass here. you they Christians in the United States primarily moved from pacifists into embracing of firearms. That shift, when I look at Jesus, that's why I see nonviolence. That's what we've said before. How does something like that really take place? Moving from like pacifism into embracing of firearms.
Yeah, I mean, again, this there were incredible shifts, really, arguably seismic shifts in faith communities around these issues in the 60s and the 70s when we got involved in Vietnam. Up till then, you know, there had been some pretty open debate within many evangelical circles about whether even the concept of just war was
Yeah,
sound. The idea, in other words, that, yeah, there may be times, although we are predominantly embracing nonviolence and pacifism, there may be times when
yeah,
force is justified. Okay, and the classic example was Hitler's Germany, when, you know, we had to, you know,
right.
stop the Holocaust and stop this guy. You know, but even, you know, before then, there were entire denominations that wouldn't budge on the idea of a just war doctrine, and so committed were they to the tenets of nonviolence within the bedrock of Christianity, you know. And that really started to
Yeah,
fragment as, again, you know, the old saying, you know, absolute power corrupts absolutely. As
yeah,
Christians found their voice in the public square and realized that, you know, they
mm,
could elect presidents, and Reagan was, you know, their first prize.
yeah,
You know, they, and Trump now, of course, you know, white evangelicals
yeah,
are the base of MAGA and Trump world. You know, I think that what I see anyway, from talking with dozens of people across evangelical Christianity around the gun question, is just uh, this idea that, you know, no, this is our time, you know, and our time,
mm,
we need to seize it with both hands. And if that means we need to be armed, then we will be armed. And
mm,
this is really troubling to me. If we sense or feel that we really actually need to use our weapons against a government that we perceive as hostile to us and our way of life, we are more than ready to use those weapons. You know, so I think
yeah,
that this is really kind of developing into a perfect storm, and anyone who cares about democracy and about Christianity ought to be troubled.
mm,
I certainly am.
yeah, yeah. So, is there any nuance in the Second Amendment that would say, hey, maybe we should do something different with this gun culture in America? I mean, it seems like the Second Amendment has become like scripture for most
Yeah.
conservative evangelicals. So, is there any nuance there? Is there something to like common sense gun reform? Is that possible with something like the Second Amendment?
Yeah, I mean, there's look, John Paul Stevens before he, you know, stepped down from the Supreme Court, and a year before his death, actually said that he felt that the Second Amendment was one of the greatest frauds perpetrated upon the American citizenry, and that if
Mm.
if it could be done over, it should never have been part of the Constitution. So that's
Yeah.
a very very provocative statement, right?
Hmm.
Scholars have debated for decades, centuries, really, about the well-regulated militia. We look
Hmm.
clearly, our forefathers wanted the citizenry to be armed, but let's put this in perspective, can't we? That I mean, we were facing, we were fighting for our independence from Britain. We were trying to make our way in a new country, and we were also using muskets and
Mm.
powder, and which took a couple of minutes to reload after each shot. The Second Amendment
Yeah.
never envisioned an AR-15 military style assault rifle, and you
Yep.
will never win that argument with me that those kinds of weapons belong in civilian hands. I'm not
Yeah.
buying. I'm just not buying it.
Yeah.
Josh, the AR-15 is actually the weapon of choice in America today, and among evangelical
Mm.
Christians who are buying them. You know, some families more than one. You know,
Yeah.
and it's like somebody told me it's like the Ford F-150 pickup of firearms. It's just sort of like the gun. That you got to have. And if you're a Christian, again, you've got you. I okay. So look, part of my writing this book was to pull back the curtain on what I see as evangelical complicity and hypocrisy in our gun crisis. But the other
Yeah.
part of writing the book was to sort of like a prophetic lament almost to the church to
Hmm.
say, look, can we please rethink this? Is this really who
Yeah.
we want to be? Is this who Jesus wants us to be? And I'll leave one other thought, and I'll step off the soapbox. Fear, fear is the antithesis of faith, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you're a person of faith, you should not be a fearful person. I mean, these two
No.
things are like oil and water, and so I feel like
Hmm.
we've really betrayed some of the basic aspects of what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ when we cling to guns and gun culture.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think I think that quote that you just said is that AR-15s are more common than Ford F-150s. Uh, that came from some evangelicals that own a gun manufacturing plant. I think, is that
Yes,
correct? I think that
yes,
was right in that
yep,
section that
right,
I was reading.
indeed,
So let's go into that. As evangelicals there's a I don't know, there's a myriad of gun manufacturers that are owned by evangelicals that have actually then put Bible verses on their automatic weapons, and which is kind of strange. As you were starting to do this work and interviewing them, what were some of the justifications that you have found for the evangelicals actually owning gun manufacturers and selling a bunch of guns to the public?
right. So again, and you alluded to this a moment ago, Josh, that for many evangelicals, the Second Amendment is like Scripture. They see it as breathed by
Yeah.
God. So anything around guns and gun freedoms is actually seen as righteous and very much within God's will for us as a people and for us
Yeah.
as individuals. So all that, they frame it that way. And it's important to keep that in mind. The Most of the evangelical gun companies, I reached out to many of them, and almost all of them shut me down. They didn't want to talk. I was
Hmm.
able to go down to Indiana and speak with one company, called Fostech, and it's owned by some brothers and cousins who are all white evangelicals. And I'll be honest. I flew down there, got in my rental car, and before I even hopped out to buzz the buzzer at the factory, kind of had them figured out in my mind. I wanted them to be memes. I wanted them to be
Hmm.
caricatures, good old boys. And they weren't. They were extremely thoughtful men. And we had an incredible conversation where they really
Yeah.
unpacked, their justification for putting these weapons in civilian hands. And a key value for them is family. And so, again, they want to give
Hmm.
people the tools they need to defend their families in a society that, yeah, does have crime. And that's a whole other rabbit hole we can go down, because crime is
Yeah.
down, right? Crime is way down in American
Yeah.
cities.
Mm.
And the president is just has, again, a false narrative that he's using to justify
Yeah.
sending National Guard troops into cities that, where murder and,
Hmm.
and other violent crime is way down. But, they wanted to produce these weapons for people to have, to protect their lives and property should they be menaced in any way. And again, that's a noble thing. I mean, I don't think anyone would
Yeah.
want, their family to be victimized without without doing something about it. But they just, yeah, there's this overwhelming feeling as well that, we might be called upon to use our arms, to take up arms against the government. This is part of the Second Amendment. This idea that, uh, there's a kind of a hidden army within the United States to make sure that, we don't have tyranny. And okay, all right, so let's unpack that for a second, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
so let's assume that everybody in the country has an AR-15. Okay, the government has nukes, attack
Yeah.
helicopters, submarines, uh, tanks,
Yep.
drones. I mean, the list goes on and on. Do you really think that even with your AR-15 military style assault rifle, that you're going to, you know, defend yourself against a government with all of those tools at its disposal? I just, it breaks, the logic just escapes me here,
Yeah.
And what we're left with is an evangelical embrace of guns as the answer to our gun crisis. In other words, we have a gun crisis. We need more guns. How are we ever going
Yeah.
to get out of this vicious cycle if we don't break that way of thinking?
Uh huh. Yeah. I want to break the cycles of violence. That's my core thing in my life right now, is breaking cycles of violence in all areas, and especially right now, gun violence in this conversation. But as we see gun violence and we see mass shootings a lot, I don't even know how many mass shootings we've already had this year in America, but it's in the hundreds, and it's a lot of mass shootings. And in the most horrific mass shootings, what I see is a lot of people have the argument, well, guns don't kill people, people kill people. So don't worry about the gun issue. It's not the guns, it's the people. We need to work on mental health or something else. It's not the guns. That's a big thing. And then another thing from a lot of the evangelical church is, hey, thoughts and prayers are going out. There's no really action to the prayer. It's just thoughts and prayers to the community. What would you say to both of those things? Thoughts and prayers to the community, and guns don't kill people, people kill people.
Right. So to the first point, that guns don't kill people. Okay, sure, but we are awash in weapons. We've got more guns than citizens in the United States. We have so many guns. We don't
Yeah.
even know how many guns we have. It's hard. Somewhere north of 400 million guns in this country.
My
There's
goodness.
a in Switzerland there's a group called the Small Arms Survey, which does excellent and very accurate work looking at gun culture globally. And the most recent survey shows that we have 120 firearms for every 100 citizens, which puts us
Mm,
way, way at the top of the international rankings. And the next
yeah.
country is the Falkland Islands, which has 62 uh, firearms for every 100 citizens. So we're like
Wow.
double, the next on the list. And it's I look like you. I've worked and lived internationally. I actually spent the better part of 20 years as a foreign correspondent for the Associated Press in Europe. I
Yeah.
also worked in Africa and the Middle East on assignment. And you just don't find this kind of gun violence anywhere else in the world. Not even in
Yeah.
places like Gaza. I mean, really, I mean, people are
Yeah.
not, killing each other like that. Obviously, there's war, and there,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but it just doesn't happen. And mental health is always raised as an issue. I'm not going to deny that, of course, some shooters may be mentally ill. That's quite possible.
No.
But again, mental illness occurs in every country of the world. We don't have
Hmm.
we don't corner the market on psychiatric disorders,
Yeah.
and yet again they don't have these kinds of shootings and this frequency, where
Mm.
we actually have more mass shootings in the United States than we have days of the year. In fact,
Mm.
just before COVID, we had twice as many mass shootings as days of the year. It was up in the 600 high
Wow.
600s. A mass shooting, for our purposes, by the way, for our listeners, is generally defined as a shooting in which at least four people are injured or killed, not counting the shooter. Um, so that's sort of the
Yeah.
benchmark, right? So look, we guns are within easy reach in this country, and that's what's driving
Hmm.
our uniquely American gun scourge. And then to your
Yeah.
second question about thoughts and prayers. Look, I'm a Jesus follower. I'm a thinking person, and
Yeah.
I pray, right? So I send thoughts
Yeah.
and prayers all the
Of course.
time, right? It's part of what we
Of
call being,
course. Yes.
it's empathy, it's compassion. There's
Hmm.
nothing wrong with thoughts and prayers, okay? Where it becomes problematic is when we stop, and when we allow our thoughts and prayers to
Yeah.
absolve us of any concrete action, and that's exactly what we've done in this country. I was the
Yeah.
AP bureau chief for New England when a gunman entered Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown,
Mm.
Connecticut, and turned it into a killing field. And we all thought that would be like this transcendent moment when everything would change, when we would finally reclaim our collective sanity and do something concrete. And there was, for a few days, or maybe a week, there was this
Yeah.
sort of sense of hope, and it just dissolved. Right, we just never could get
Yep.
off of get anywhere practical on this issue. And so, yeah, thoughts and prayers in this context are pretty useless, honestly. And when you talk to people who have had their families touched by gun violence, they get pretty cynical about thoughts and prayers, because
Mm.
you know,
Hmm.
they don't want to hear it. All right, they want to see real action.
Yep.
So, one other
And
thought,
so,
Ben. Well,
yeah.
just to complete the circle on that. So, evangelicals, again, I've been asked, why are you picking on evangelicals? First of all, they're my former tribe. I love them.
Uh huh.
And I
Yeah.
feel you know. Entitled and qualified to sort of address what I see as their shortcomings, because I was in that movement big time for a long time.
Yeah.
The biggest problem here in the complicity is that, being such a persuasive and powerful political group, they actually could stop gun violence tomorrow by siding with gun violence prevention activists, and by actually embracing their pro-life stance, to extend that
Yeah.
to gun
Hmm.
violence. And instead they elect like-minded people to governor's offices and state
Yeah.
legislatures and Congress. And so
Yeah.
that's actually the biggest problem, right? Is that they're
Yeah.
perpetuating our crisis by not allowing uh, our elected representatives to carry out the common sense reforms that most of us say we want.
Yes. Yeah, I do believe that a pro life stance should be pro all of life and not just pro life in the womb, but pro all of life. Like, hey, we're pro life, not just just the life before they're out of the womb. So that needs to happen. But we have seen in other countries that a mass shootings have happened, then they actually do pass some common sense gun reform, and it's helpful. As you've went around the world, if you've researched, what did you find other countries implement and do to actually negate some of these mass shootings from happening?
I'm so glad you brought that up because we tend to have this sense of fatalism about the gun violence crisis in the United States. We feel like we can't do anything about it. We're just we can actually, and other countries have. So notably, Australia in 1996 had a horrible bloodbath in Port Arthur, where a gunman over a period of like a couple of days just walked around indiscriminately shooting and killing people. And it would so scandalize the country that very quickly they were able to enact laws restricting access to most most firearms, so from by the general public, and with very few exceptions, have had any kind of a repeat like that, since then. And New Zealand, just a few years ago, had these shootings at some mosques, that were horrible, with a great loss of life, and took decisive action, kind of borrowing from the Australian playbook, restricting access to automatic weapons and semi-automatic weapons, and greatly tightening up, on all of that. And they've had success with removing gun violence from their lists of societal ills. For the book, I went to the UK, to Scotland, where the little town of Dunblane had its
Yeah.
own version of Sandy Hook in also 1996, the same year as Australia had its troubles. They lost 16 primary school students and their teacher, who died trying to protect them. And again, they were so scandalized and so struck by this senseless act that within days a grassroots movement built, and it became so persuasive and so energetic that even members of parliament jumped on, and they were able to actually enact common sense legislation to restrict access to these kinds of weapons. And they have not had a mass shooting in the United Kingdom since then. That was almost next
Wow.
year. That will be 30 years, right, since that
Wow.
horrible
Yeah.
thing happened. So you can't tell me that it can't be done. Yes, we have a
Yeah.
Second Amendment in to our Constitution, but who's to say we can't work with that and pass laws that will at least get
Yeah.
the military style weapons off the streets.
Yeah.
We have surveys that show consistently that a massive plurality of Americans want a ban on military style assault rifles. We're talking about
Hmm.
north of 80% of Americans want this.
Yeah.
If it isn't that in a democracy, isn't that an
Yeah.
imperative? Isn't that aren't we supposed to
Yes.
do what the people want? So I think
Yeah.
we can do this. We have a huge lucrative gun industry and a powerful gun lobby, and and we need to overcome those things somehow.
Yeah. I mean, that gets into like, should we have lobbyists roaming the halls of our government as well? It goes
Yeah.
into a lot of different things. But is there anything moving the needle in America right now? Have you found people? And I know there's some places in your book that there are people trying to do something. One are you actually go and visit some gun buyback places. Um, the one in New Mexico said, do you think it's making a difference? Is there anything making a difference right now? Is it helping?
I think it is. I think unfortunately it's small scale. We are putting somewhere around 37,000 weapons a day into the marketplace. I mean, and the numbers of guns we're taking off the streets are a tiny fraction of that. So it feels a little futile. But I think anything that gets any guns off the streets is a great thing. Let's keep in mind too. Let me just interject here, because we've been talking mostly about mass shootings and mass casualty events, and
Hmm.
we have a lot of those. But by far, the greatest number of gun deaths are suicides. And so again, I appeal
Mm,
to my evangelical brothers and sisters. If you care about life, if you really care
yeah.
about life, you'll care about this. That you're
Mm,
this is something that NRA doesn't want you to know, but your home becomes less safe, not more safe, the moment you
Mm.
bring a gun inside. So,
Yeah.
and I'll circle back to the good stuff that's happening in a second, but I just wanted to interject that here because I think it's important, right?
Yeah.
You know, we're running around 47,000 gun deaths a year, and about 27,000 of those are suicides. So if there's a
Mm.
gun in your home and you're going through a
Mm.
bit of a crisis, the chances of you succeeding in an attempt are very,
Yeah.
very good, unfortunately, with a firearm, right? So there's
Yeah.
that. There's also, and this is really disturbing and astonishing to me, but the accidental deaths of children in the United States, guns account for the greatest number of accidental deaths, more than car crashes, actually. So,
Wow.
again, you have a gun in the home, and people, in order to feel like they have it within easy reach, defy common sense and, in many cases, safe storage laws, and keep that gun loaded on their nightstand or
Yeah.
in the little drawer of their nightstand right next to their Bible,
Yeah.
right? And that gun is
Yeah.
loaded and ready, for a home invasion or something like that. That's not how you're supposed to store your weapon, right? It's supposed to be
Yeah.
locked up separately from the ammunition. That's supposed to be locked up, right? And a child can find your weapon and play with it with tragic consequences, and it happens all the time. It's heartbreaking, right? So there's
Mm.
that.
Yeah.
So the all, and then finally, domestic violence. I mean, when there's a gun in the home and there's a dust up between husband and wife, or the chances of that becoming a homicide are exponentially greater if there is a gun. And we see this all the time as well. So these are all reasons why, beyond mass shootings, that we need to be invested in trying to turn the tide here. But yes, there are gun amnesty programs, buybacks. There's some beautiful work being done. Shane Claiborne in Philadelphia, who founded Red Letter Christians, and has also written a book about gun violence and efforts to end the scourge. Helped found Raw Tools, which goes around collecting weapons that are turned in, sometimes in cooperation with police forces who offer folks to turn in their weapons, no questions asked.
Yeah.
The people who turn in their weapons get cash or a gift card or a grocery card, whatever, and it's on a sliding scale. It can be a few $100s for a an AR-15, and maybe 200 for a rifle, 150 or whatever for a handgun. And it's real cash, right? And then they do something beautiful. They have these portable forges that they heat up to like 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and they beat these guns into garden tools, right? So it's almost literally beating swords into plowshares, as we see in Isaiah, which I think it gives me chills every time I consider that. So there's that. Then there's a few other things, if I may highlight.
Yeah.
There are there are progressive Christians doing a lot of work like this. My favorite example is a group of rogue nuns who are buying stock in gun manufacturing companies, which then gives them sort of a seat at the table. If they buy enough shares, they can introduce shareholder resolutions aimed at compelling the gun manufacturer to spend more time and treasure on safety measures for its firearms,
Yeah.
or actually persuading them and pressuring them from the inside out to stop marketing weapons to young people, right? Because there's a nexus of gun violence is glorified in video games, and then sometimes the gun
Mm.
manufacturers advertise around that, and it's sort of it's a problem. you know so
Yeah.
I think there's some beautiful work being done. What I'll tell you, Joshua, is that I see evangelicals as mostly invisible in that work.
Mm.
It's being done by progressive Christians who, like me, and I'm a progressive
Mm.
Christian now, right? I was an
Yeah.
evangelical. Evangelicals have since told me that I'm no longer a Christian because I'm not an evangelical
Yep.
anymore. Because they own, right? Because
Yeah.
evangelicals
Yeah.
own the kingdom, and they decide,
Yeah.
who gets to to go to paradise and who doesn't. And apparently, I don't get to go
Yeah.
anymore, which is which is another conversation for another time. But it's pretty damned infuriating from where I sit, as somebody
Yes.
who deeply loves, But anyway,
Hmm. Yes, I mean that's one of the things that as I was reading your book and in other conversations that I've had this weekend, I was really contemplating the exceptionalism found in evangelicalism. That it basically that you know the way to Jesus comes through evangelicals, and then you're in it just in every sense. As I'll I'll say this as somebody who's a missionary and a missions leader in an evangelical world, even looking at unreached people groups and counting the number of evangelicals as whether a group is reached or unreached kind of infuriates me of they have to be a certain subset of Christianity to actually know and be with Jesus. There's a lot of exceptionalism. There's also a lot of merging of culture of like the culture that wherever they are into a place of faith. Is there a way to like separate some of that out, both the paternalism exceptionalism type of mentality and the enmeshing of whatever culture they're in into a place of how do we actually follow Jesus in a way that he talks about in scripture, the ways and the teachings of Jesus?
I think there is. I think it's a challenge. I forgive me for being so brash here, but I see incredible arrogance among my evangelical brothers and sisters. Some spiritual arrogance,
Yeah.
which is hard to penetrate. On the same
Mhm.
At the same time, evangelicals are not a monolith any more than any other group. And I was heartened by conversations I had in researching and reporting the book with evangelicals who, some are questioning this, fealty to firearms. And I think that some are persuadable, and first of all, not every evangelical owns a weapon. And even some who do
Yeah.
are, persuadable in terms of, gee, do I really need this thing? And I think this is where
Yeah.
in terms of solutions, in terms of hope, how can we break this cycle? I kind of lay some of these things out in the book. I don't think that we can solve our gun crisis without intentional conversation with evangelicals because, again, of such a central role that they play here. And I think it's tempting to demonize evangelicals on this issue and to isolate them and even to almost ignore them or brush them off. But that's a mistake because we have to dialogue with people. I think there are two areas. What we already kind of touched on one earlier in this conversation, and that is maybe appealing to evangelicals' sense of being pro-life, of being of upholding the sanctity of life, and getting them to rethink gun culture because it robs people of life, and that's a
Yeah.
persuasive argument that can get some traction. And the other one is evangelicals are tend to be you know scriptural purists and
Mm.
take their Bibles very
Yep.
seriously. And I think there's an interesting conversation that can be had with folks around juxtaposing the Second Amendment and the Second Commandment. The Second Commandment is that we
Yep.
don't have idols, and we actually have
Yeah.
what boils down to gun idolatry in white evangelical circles, where people are trusting more in their firearm than they are in their in Jesus. And that's problematic. But I think again, that could I don't think that evangelicals have always framed it or looked at it that way. And that I've found in some conversations that gets their attention. Like, oh,
Yeah.
well, I don't want to do that. But it's hard because everyone is just so dug in here. And I guess that's probably sort of our cultural moment, our political moment.
Yeah.
not just on
It
guns, but
sure
on
feels like
everything.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it feels like everybody's dug in their position and they're like, I'm just not going to be swayed the other way. We're not going to talk anymore. And when we talk, it delves into just a shouting match
right,
and arguing. And,
right.
so we're not actually listening to each other anymore.
No,
So we actually need to hear each other, have a conversation, like a real conversation, and not just talk at each other. So I hope that happens. What is your hope for this book in Guns We Trust? What do you want? As if you talk to your readers, you talk to the United States in particular. What do you hope for this?
well, again, first, I really felt like I needed to pull back the curtain on what's really going on here, because the evangelical complicity in our gun crisis is profound, and I don't think a lot of people realize it. I've never suggested for a moment that evangelicals are shooting up the country. That's not what this is about. And I think, again,
Right.
the great majority of gun owners, evangelical or otherwise, are responsible people. But it feels to me like, if you are a person of faith, that you're going to want to be invested in making society a better place. Christians were at the forefront of some of our greatest social ills. I'm thinking particularly of child labor, where Christians largely took the lead on that issue, and that was a horrible thing for decades, for centuries. And so I think, I was talking with somebody the other day, and I maybe this was a little snarky of me, but I suggested that, if you're going to be a person of faith, maybe you ought to take the spiritual equivalent of the Hippocratic Oath. Above all, do no harm.
Mm,
Right. So I think this is
yeah.
my, for the general public, I want to pull back the curtain, show them evangelicals are really all up in this mess, and they're
Yeah.
blocking progress for the rest of us. And so arguably they're making the
Mm,
country less safe for the rest of us by propagating this
mm,
gun culture,
yeah.
just by virtue of their numbers and their the way they look at the Second Amendment, and the way they look at guns. But also to just sort of hold out an olive branch to my former faith tribe, and say, can we just talk about this? Because whatever we're doing now, it's just not working. And maybe together we can find a way forward that actually values life and honors God.
Mm, amen. I hope so. I really do. A couple quick questions I have for you here at the end, Bill. One, if you
Sure.
go back to your 21-year-old self, what advice would you give?
Well, honestly, I came to faith when I was hitchhiking home from college, and an evangelical picked me up.
Hmm.
Uh, a progressive Christian, a new friend and an ally on this gun issue, kind of actually told me the other day. She said, "Gosh, I wish I was the one who had picked you up when you were hitchhiking, so that you could have actually entered a branch of Christianity that actually saw, you know working for the common good and trying to be real salt and light in the world, as good things." And yeah. So I guess in some
Yeah.
ways I wish that I didn't spend as much time and treasure in evangelical Christianity, because as I said at the top, I kind of feel betrayed right now. I'm
Mm,
deconstructing my faith, and reconstructing it. I'm
yeah.
committed to reconstructing it. I really am.
Yeah.
Uh, but this has kind of rocked my world, personally,
Yeah.
and spiritually. So I
Yeah.
guess I would have to tell my 21-year-old self, hang in there, buddy. I mean, it's been a bumpy ride, but as long as we still have breath and purpose, we ain't done yet.
That's right. That's right. Anything you've been reading or watching lately you could recommend?
Well, I mean, if anybody wants to go deeper on this issue, I highly recommend Kristen Kolb Dumay's best-selling book, Jesus and John Wayne, which really, really traces
Hmm.
in excruciating and actually maddening detail how this, how Jesus came to be viewed as kind of a Rambo slash Marlboro man, figure.
Yeah.
I highly recommend her book. It's yeah, that really, really sort of lays bare how we got away
Hmm.
from the person of Jesus that, I think a lot of us thought we knew and hardly recognize anymore
Yeah.
in white Christian
Yeah.
nationalist circles.
Yeah. 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 Bill, In Guns We Trust is out anywhere books are sold.
Yes.
Is there anywhere in particular that you'd like to point people to get the book or to connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, look, that you can get it anywhere. I always point people to their local independent bookstores because I think these are treasures in our society. And of course, you can buy it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, Walmart, all the usual suspects. I'm always a little reluctant to make Jeff Bezos a richer man, so I point folks to their independent bookstores, and there are a lot of public libraries who are you know putting the book on their shelves, which is very encouraging. I got a chance to speak at the American Library Association annual conference in Philadelphia this past summer, and there was great enthusiasm for this title. So I hope you read it, and if you do, please drop a review in Goodreads or on Amazon, because that sort of juices the algorithm to put it in front of more people. And more than anything, more than wanting to sell books, I really want people to kind of own a piece of this fight and invest in just trying to turn the corner on this maddening endless cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Bill, thank you for this conversation. Thank you for this book, In Guns We Trust. Thank you for making me angry to move towards something that, hey, I need to actually continue to do something to call out these cycles of violence that we've been in, and say that I truly believe that the way of love and Jesus and peace is really the only way to break cycles of violence. This is what I've come to. Like, this is it. It's the actually embodying the ways of Jesus, which is nonviolent, the way of love. And if we could do that, we may actually move the needle and actually see less gun deaths, less deaths in the United States, that we can get rid of uh, a lot of these guns that we have. And we could actually implement some common sense gun reform in this country so that we can actually see life in this country. And I don't have to moved towards fear to pray for my son and school to be protected every time he goes into school, but I could actually just pray it in love and care for the school instead of out of fear. So thank you, Bill. It was a great conversation.
Great conversation. We don't have to keep living like this, and we don't have to keep dying like this. So thank you for giving me a chance to talk about these issues, and God bless you.
Thanks.